Okay, so for this part of your KIN 225 lecture, I'm covering this concept called the glycemic index. So this refers to different quality of carbohydrates that can be consumed before endurance exercise. And you'll see that one type of carbohydrate is more favored than the other for improving endurance performance. So question here is it better to stimulate fat oxidation or carbohydrate oxidation in muscle during long duration exercise? And then why is it better to stimulate one or the other? The answer here is that it's better to stimulate fat oxidation because this would help to spare glycogen. So glycogen is your main carbohydrate store in your muscle. And once that glycogen gets depleted, it causes fatigue during long duration exercise. So the more you can use fats during long duration exercise, the more you can prevent fatigue by preventing carbohydrate oxidation and the utilization of glycogen. So the glycemic index indicates the blood glucose response after consuming a food. A high glycemic index meal results in a high blood glucose, and as mentioned previously, glucose stimulates release of insulin from the pancreas, so that also results in a high insulin level. And the problem with having high insulin levels before exercise is that insulin inhibits fat oxidation. So if you inhibit your fat oxidation, you're going to have to rely more on carbohydrate oxidation, and that's going to result in faster depletion of your muscle glycogen stores. So theoretically, a low glycemic index meal that results in lower insulin release would be better for stimulating fat oxidation during exercise and preserving muscle glycogen. So this table shows you the glycemic index values for different foods. So you can see low glycemic index foods are listed at the top, then you have moderate glycemic index foods, and then high glycemic index foods. So common high glycemic index foods, these are foods that result in a fast increase in blood sugar levels, include mashed potatoes, Gatorade, white bread. So anything that's made up of a lot of simple sugars. And then the more complex carbohydrates are included in the low glycemic index group. So that includes things like lentils, very low glycemic index. You have chocolate milk and spaghetti that are popular with endurance athletes, and those are also low in glycemic index. So one set of studies we've run in our college involves soccer players and soccer performance, and whether it's better to consume low or high glycemic index meals before simulated soccer performance. So in this picture, you see someone running, and you can see they're wearing a face mask, and that face mask is hooked up to a portable metabolic system that allows measurement of oxygen consumption and carbon dioxide output. And from those two variables, you should know by now that you can determine respiratory exchange ratio from those variables by dividing your carbon dioxide output by your oxygen consumption. And from that, you can estimate your fat oxidation and your carbohydrate oxidation. So we use this portable metabolic system while someone's running during a simulated soccer game to assess fat oxidation and carbohydrate oxidation. And this was done after they've consumed a low glycemic index or high glycemic index meal before their simulated soccer game. So this is a study that we published just last year. It's a comparison between low glycemic index and high glycemic index sport nutrition bars consumed before a simulated soccer match. So the low glycemic index sport nutrition bar contained things like lentils that gave it a low glycemic index, and the high glycemic index sport nutrition bar was a common sport nutrition bar. It was the Clif Bar that you can buy at most stores, and that bar has a high glycemic index, so a lot of simple sugars. And these graphs show the effects of consuming those bars. This one on insulin levels. So this is before the onset of the simulated game. And you can see that because of the high release of glucose into the blood, the high glycemic index bar results in a higher insulin release, whereas the low glycemic index bar results in a lower insulin release before the match. So recall that insulin inhibits fat oxidation, and so we would expect the low glycemic index condition to have a greater fat oxidation with that lower insulin level. And that's what we saw. So you can see in this graph, this is the time period during the game. So a typical soccer game lasts 90 minutes. So you can see this is the halftime break. And during the game, you can see the fat oxidation was higher in the low glycemic index condition than the high glycemic index condition. And this is beneficial because it's going to prevent you from oxidizing carbohydrates, and that's going to prevent glycogen depletion. So you can see in this graph down here, we have carbohydrate oxidation again during the soccer match. You can see the low glycemic index condition has a lower carbohydrate oxidation. The high glycemic index condition has a higher carbohydrate oxidation. So theoretically, this would result in a greater glycogen depletion in the high glycemic index condition because you're using more carbohydrates during the soccer match to support your performance. Now this goes back a few years, so almost 10 years, where we actually assessed glycogen levels near the end of a simulated soccer match. And again, this was after consuming low versus high glycemic index meals before the simulated soccer match. So you can see the conditions here. We had a control condition where there was no meal given before the match. A low glycemic index condition where we gave a meal of boiled lentils 2 hours before the match, and then high glycemic index condition where we gave a meal of instant mashed potatoes and white bread 2 hours before the match. And this is glycogen levels from muscle biopsies taken at the 75-minute point in the match. And you can see that the low glycemic index condition allowed a better maintenance of muscle glycogen compared to the high glycemic index condition. And then you can see the control as expected because they didn't consume any meals before the match. They had the greatest glycogen depletion during the simulated soccer match. So again, you don't want to have low glycogen levels because that leads to fatigue. So this is a summary of the comparison of low glycemic versus high glycemic index carbohydrates. So low glycemic index carbohydrates result in less insulin release, and this allows a greater fat oxidation and lower carbohydrate oxidation in muscle. This spares muscle glycogen and would allow for an increase in endurance exercise performance.